Hello everyone and welcome back to True Crime Mysteries. My name is Megan, and I first want to start off by saying a very warm thank you for all the kind words on last week's video. Last week we covered the solved murder case of Dawn Olenak, who for decades had only been known as Princess Doe. She finally got her name back, as well as justice. And if you missed it, it was my first on-camera debut. As I mentioned in that video, this is likely something I'll be doing going forward because of policy changes on the platform, but I'm so glad that a lot of you really liked the new format. There's so many kind words and encouragement that I haven't been able to respond to all of them, but they were so appreciated, and I am trying to get to everyone who took the time to say something kind. It's a big change, but all the support has really helped me with my confidence. So again, thank you all. We have an amazing community, and I'm so proud of our little corner of the internet. But with that being said, let's get going. Today we're discussing a case that a community member reached out and asked me to cover. It's a heartbreaking yet perplexing case with a lot of layers and more questions than answers. The tragic death of Bethany Deaton. Bethany was a young nurse with a bright future, and she was found dead in what initially appeared to be a suicide. However, her family and lead detectives have long suspected that there's much more to the story. At the center of this mystery is a Christian group that some have described as cult-like, raising even more red flags. And in a bizarre twist, one member of this group initially confessed to Bethany's murder, only to later recant, claiming he was coerced by the church elders into making a false confession. This case is shrouded in secrecy, conflicting testimonies, and a series of events that suggest everything is not what it seems. Bethany's family is still looking for justice, and the two lead detectives also maintain that there's much more to this case than meets the eye. We're going to start from the beginning. This is Bethany Deaton's story. Let's get into it. In the tranquil suburbs of Grandview, Missouri, a seemingly ordinary life took a dark turn, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and perplexing mysteries. At the heart of this puzzle lies the story of Bethany Deaton, a young woman whose untimely death unveiled a tangled web of deceit, manipulation, and hidden truths. Bethany's life appeared idyllic on the surface, deeply entrenched in her religious community and seemingly content in her marriage. Yet beneath the facade of normalcy lurk shadows of doubt and suspicion. As details of her peculiar death emerged, the spotlight turned to her husband, her church, and the intricate dynamics that shaped her existence. Around 9:40 p.m. on October 30th, 2012, the Jackson County Sheriff's Office was called to Longview Lake Picnic Shelter No. 12, just outside downtown Kansas City, Missouri, on reports of a suspicious vehicle that had been in the area for a while. The area was wooded and somewhat isolated from surrounding suburbs. The picnic area overlooked Longview Lake. Jackson County investigator Penny Cole arrived at the scene first. They were directed to a tan Ford Windstar van in the far corner of the parking lot. Passers-by had noticed the van and felt that something wasn't right. When officers peered into the van, they saw what appeared to be the body of a young woman, slumped over with one leg curled onto the other, on the third-row passenger side of the minivan. She was wearing a light fleece sweater, black sweatpants, running shoes, and a diamond wedding ring. There was a white plastic bag wrapped around her head, bottled pills, and a purple pillow lay beside her. At first glance, investigators believed they were dealing with a suicide. The scene was cordoned off, and it didn't take long for investigators to identify the woman from her hospital identification as 27-year-old Bethany Deaton, a nurse at the nearby Menorah Medical Center. Other than what was found near Bethany, the rest of the contents inside the van seemed very normal. Sunglasses, a cell phone, a notebook, several CDs littered the floor, all produced by the International House of Prayer, a popular Christian organization, or IHOP, but not to be confused with the breakfast restaurant chain. Also in the vehicle was a bag of unfinished thank you cards from a recent wedding that looked like she had just been working on them. The items that stood out as odd were 2 bottles of Tylenol PM, one bottle empty and the other was full. The notebook was filled with troubled journal entries and odd, nonsensical lists. They also came across a curious note that appeared to be a suicide note, and it read, quote, "My name is Bethany Deaton. I chose this evil thing. I did it because I wouldn't be a real person, and what is the point of living if it's too late for that? I wish I had chosen differently a long time ago. I knew it all and refused to listen. Maybe Jesus will still save me." Bethany Ann Ludline was born on October 15, 1985 in San Antonio, Texas, to her parents, Eric and Carol. She was just one of 5 children, including 3 sisters, Erin, Shannon, and Christine, and a single brother named Matthew. She grew up in a religious, devout Christian household and was homeschooled until high school. Her life was very average. At high school, Bethany would meet someone who would become a lifelong best friend, Taryn O'Brien. Taryn remembered her time in school with Bethany fondly, saying Bethany was a romantic at heart and had great aspirations of being a wife and a mother, and described her ideal man with surprising detail. Bethany was a huge bookworm and avid writer. She loved Charles Dickens and excelled in writing lyrical and poetic stories. Those who read her work remarked that she had a unique way of making her work emote well and elicit a lot of emotion. She was a very gifted writer, and she received a scholarship to attend Southwestern University, just outside Austin, Texas. In September of 2005, she'd begin classes there. Bethany quickly settled into college life. It wouldn't be long before she met Tyler Deaton, who was also a student at Southwestern. Throughout the early 2000s, Tyler had spent time building up a small but steady community of passionate Christian students. With natural charisma and leadership skills, Tyler quickly made a name for himself amongst Christian students who flocked to his prayer sessions on campus. One of those who would be caught up in his magnetic personality was Bethany, and she started regularly attending his group meetings. However, the group didn't just discuss religion. Another of their core discussions was a mutual fascination of fictional fantasy books. In particular, the works of Tolkien, the Chronicles of Narnia, and especially Harry Potter. The idea of a ragtag group of kids with a singular mission of defeating a dark enemy together, facing all kinds of odds against them, really resonated with the group, and a lot of them really felt that Tyler was their very own Harry Potter. One of the group members described the love for fantasy and how it spoke to them and their faith, saying, quote, "Fueled by our sense of being on a divine mission, one of their chief attractions was a sense of belonging to a secret club with exclusive access to knowledge and power. That was the root of our whole ideology." Tyler Deaton was raised in an even more rigid and religious household than most. His family were very devout Presbyterians and lived in rural Texas. Tyler was one of those kids that excelled in almost everything. He participated in sports, did well in them, he played piano, he sang, and he did well in school. He was in the marching band, and on the outside, he seemed like a young man with a bright future. But on the inside, Tyler was battling against something so painful he never spoke of it to anyone. Tyler had experienced an attraction to men, but this conflicted with his religious beliefs and the fear of being ostracized from his family, his church, and core beliefs that were too much to bear. Tyler would later say, quote, "To me, being gay meant you were this, like messed up, even like a villainous person. You couldn't love God. It was so, I didn't identify as gay." He spent much of his free time praying and finding ways to repress his sexuality in the hopes that it would just go away. Tyler hated himself, and it made him very confrontational. In high school, he became a champion debater, and this made him develop a very jaded personality that saw everything strictly as black and white. You either agreed with Tyler or you were against him. While at university, Tyler was described as charismatic and was able to pull in Christian students from across different disciplines. As the months went by, more students joined their circle, including Micah. According to Micah, he and Bethany clicked from day one and shared a love of God and music. He described Bethany as having a quiet energy that flowed through the group. Her life was one of the luminous and promising I've ever known. It was also becoming increasingly clear that Bethany was interested in Tyler. She attended all meetings and prayer sessions, not just because of her faith, but because of the spark that she felt between her and Tyler. However, unfortunately for Bethany, Tyler didn't feel the same way about her. Tyler used prayer as a tool not just for himself, but for his followers to reject evil, the Antichrist, and be guided away from sin. Tyler became the group's de facto leader. And in the group, Tyler was seen as having this kind of magical, otherworldly ability, and that was believed to come directly from God. A friend described what this looked like, saying, quote, "In the years I was with him, things were constantly happening that I had to shrug away as being the work of the Holy Spirit. Tyler would raise his voice and say Jesus, and the neighbor's music would immediately stop. He would tell birds to fly away and they'd fly. He would place curses on appliances and then they wouldn't work anymore." Tyler embraced this belief and said that he was more chosen than others. He was more connected with God and was being guided. And this was an email he sent out to the group. "Friends, I kid you not when I say that I feel God has transformed me more in that short period of time than I have been so far in my life. I have one word attached to one phrase that God has violently poured into my heart. It is echoing in the heavens right this instant, and I mean that literally. That word, that phrase is this: revival through prayer and worship. Friends, I freaking cannot wait to talk to you about this in person." In 2007, Tyler's religiosity took him and his small band of followers in a new direction. After attending an IHOP, International House of Prayer convention, Tyler and the group wanted a more 24/7 prayer lifestyle. The group of 20, fresh out of college, packed their bags and moved from Texas to Kansas City. The group lived in 2 rental properties near the IHOP headquarters, separated by gender, and called themselves the Community. And it wouldn't take long before the power that Tyler harnessed started to take a dark turn. Tyler ran with IHOP's end-of-time prophecies, taking them to an extreme level. He also began to exert control over every single member of the community. Tyler didn't work. Instead, all of the other community members were required to support him financially so that he could spend doing more meaningful work, which was prayer. He told members what they could and couldn't wear, who they could date within the group, and dictated their meal times. If someone broke the rules, they would face severe punishment. On one occasion, Tyler made members eat food from the floor like dogs for daring to defy him. Another member had her bedroom door removed after Tyler accused her of being antisocial and withdrawn. Anyone who dared to question Tyler's authority would face severe punishment. Bose Harrington, who'd been with the group since their days at Southwestern University, found himself shunned for questioning Tyler's authority over Bethany. Harrington told the CBS that for 8 months, every single member of the community shunned him. He was given basic rations of food and water and sequestered to his bedroom. Once or twice a month, Tyler, or maybe other members, would slip a note under his door. This was the only communication Harrington had with the group for 8 months. As 2010 came, things were only set to get more bizarre within the group. Tyler claimed that he had created the community after being commanded by God to start a group devoted to serving him in the correct way. After attending IHOP, which in itself holds a lot of end-of-the-world and doomsday beliefs, Tyler found something else to latch onto. He began to claim that he was having visions and prophecies that something bad was going to happen, and that the end times were drawing ever closer. Like every good cult leader, Tyler set up an end game, something to strike so much fear into the hearts of his followers, they'd have no choice but to conform and be saved. Every week, men and women in the community would have accountability meetings to discuss their sins and be absolved of them. This quickly turned into a humiliation ritual. Tyler would openly tell the women what the men had said about them in confidence, such as their desires to have sex, have relationships, etc. Tyler dictated all relationships and seemed to take great pleasure in humiliating community members. He also took it upon himself to counsel other young men who were fighting with their sexuality. Tyler would give the men one-on-one attention and bring them into the community, promising to help them get rid of their sin. In 2010, Tyler claimed that while spending time with Bethany, he was suddenly overcome with a burst of affection for her. Previously, Bethany had told Tyler that God had commanded her to marry him, which Tyler said no. Just weeks later, Bethany and Tyler would begin dating, although their relationship wasn't exactly conventional. Despite the outward appearance of being in love, Bethany and Tyler only spent one-on-one time together twice a week. According to the media, this consisted of a weekly 3-hour school night date and bread baking on Fridays. When not in the company of Bethany, Tyler would counsel the young men who were struggling with their sexuality. He openly admitted to the group that he and the other men would engage in naked spiritual wrestling, and they would lay together all night. According to Tyler, this was a way to break the thoughts of homosexuality, and one of his followers confirmed that the spiritual wrestling sessions had caused him to have a significant breakthrough in his masculinity and sexuality. In reality, Tyler was grooming these young men and preparing them to be sexual partners under the guise of being healed. With Bose Harrington being cast out and made a pariah, Micah Moore stepped in as Tyler's second in command. He hung off his every word and did everything he was commanded to do. He was described as a thoughtful and melancholy young man, going around tugging at his beard and thinking inwardly about things. Micah had started experimenting with acid, and things started to take a turn for the worse for Micah after several bad experiences taking the drug. In 2011, Bethany shocked her family when she said that she was going back to college to study nursing. Though her kind and caring disposition made her a natural at caring for patients in their most vulnerable hours, she quickly impressed her instructors with her excellent bedside manner and intelligence. She was touted as one of the top students in the program, but things were far from perfect. While Bethany excelled at Menorah Medical Center in Kansas, her friends and family outside of the community noticed that she was beginning to withdraw. Other families of community members stated that this wasn't uncommon for members to separate themselves slowly. They were encouraged to distance themselves from anyone who was, quote-unquote, holding them back from their full pursuit of the faith. Contact between Bethany and her family started to become sparse, and she spent all of her free time dedicating herself to the community and church. Bethany and Tyler continued their relationship despite only seeing each other twice a week. On August 18th, Bethany Ludline became Bethany Deaton when she and Tyler tied the knot. Those in attendance noted how awkward and forced the entire affair felt. Bethany held a beaming smile, trying to push through the pain of her crushing reality. Tyler was awkward around his new wife, a far image of what you'd expect newlyweds to be like. Those in attendance at the wedding that were from outside of the community noted that the day didn't really feel like a wedding. It was more like an extended religious ceremony. Bethany's mom said that she didn't feel like a participant of the wedding, but more felt like an observer of like a messianic union, meaning that the wedding was more like a divine experience for those born to change the world. After the bizarre and uncomfortable ceremony, Bethany and Tyler jetted off to Costa Rica for a 3-week honeymoon. The prospect of her honeymoon gave Bethany something to smile about again, and she began to perk up, but this positivity wouldn't last forever. In September 2012, the newly dubbed Deatons returned to the community, but things didn't really seem right from the start. While we don't know exactly what happened during the honeymoon, when Bethany returned, she was no longer radiant and happy. Instead, she was now often confused and seemed uncomfortable. Initially, when they returned to Kansas after the honeymoon, Bethany moved into the men's house, where Tyler had a private basement suite. But as weeks went on, she spent less and less time there. Eventually, she moved back to her old room in the women's house, telling them that she needed some space from Tyler, but not really explaining why. Eventually, she did confide in a counselor that she and Tyler had never consummated their relationship, and she blamed herself. She went on to explain that Tyler had become enraged when he failed to become aroused while interacting with Bethany. Outside of his marriage, Tyler had a voracious, intimate life, just not with Bethany. After Bethany's passing, 3 male members of the community came forward and claimed to have had a sexual relationship with Tyler. One of them even said that he and Tyler had been practicing the act before his marriage to Bethany. One of those 3 members was revealed to be Micah Moore, a young man who'd been quickly dragged into the community and found himself totally enmeshed. Tyler's maintained that he didn't believe that Bethany knew of his adultery. However, many speculate that she was very much aware, which led to a rapid decline in her mental health. Within 6 weeks of their marriage, Bethany had expressed thoughts of taking her own life and mentioned to a female community member how unhappy she was. All of this would eventually come to a head on October 23, 2012. Tyler called the police to the community's homes, telling them that his wife Bethany had threatened to drink a cup of windshield wiper fluid. Tyler had explained to the officers that Bethany's mental health had been deteriorating rapidly since their honeymoon. She was lethargic and found it hard to complete her daily tasks and chores within the compound. And many members were angry at Bethany, believing that she wasn't pulling her weight, which only caused her to sink deeper into her depression. According to Tyler, she began to say things like, "My soul is ruined, and I'm just going to hell now." After the windshield wiper fluid incident, Bethany was taken to the Truman Medical Center for psychiatric evaluation and treatment. Whilst at the facility, Bethany displayed bizarre behaviors, telling mental health nurses that a day of reckoning was upon them and possibly the group. Tyler was a big believer in the end times and had forced the group to prepare for the end of the world. He had even called in an ex-soldier and other survival experts to help the group stock up on canned foods and teach them how to survive when society would inevitably collapse. Bethany made one more bizarre comment to a mental health staff member. She said that it would be easier to die than change, and that she would never be able to achieve salvation because she was so damned. She didn't really explain what she had meant by that. She would only be at the facility for a few days, and on October 25, 2012, she was evaluated and Bethany was deemed to be well enough to go home. This decision would later be heavily scrutinized and criticized by Bethany's family and friends. She was eventually released into Tyler and the community's care, which would mark the last time healthcare professionals would see her. Tyler never contacted Bethany's family while she was going through this. Tyler wasn't even taking this seriously, and he stated that he believed that she was doing this intentionally for attention. For Bethany, leaving Tyler was never an option. Their marriage was going to be for eternity, and she internalized all the issues that she and Tyler were experiencing as her fault. Tyler had very little concern for her happiness or well-being and just continued to live his life however he felt fit. He never tried to make her feel better about the situation, and he never tried to help her. Things would all come to a head on October 29th, 2012, when Tyler gathered the entire community for what he called an intense prayer session. Tyler quickly commanded the attention of the group, giving them an ultimatum. They would need to choose between the community or what he called their own personal selfishness. And it was clear to all of the members that Tyler was directing this message directly at Bethany. He believed that her threats of self-harm were merely an act. Tyler later told CBS, quote, "Bethany was sitting with her back up against the wall, curled into a ball with this mortified facial expression. Bethany knew the message had been directed at her, but she was powerless to act." Tyler was not only the leader of the community, but he was her husband, and she had hoped for a happy, blissful marriage. But the notion of romance and intimacy had faded within weeks, and Bethany was desperately miserable, but felt trapped within the group, and Tyler said he was sick of Bethany's behavior. After the intense prayer session ended, Bethany went back to her room, and this would be the last time many of the community would see her alive. The next morning, Bethany awoke as usual and was due to head to the Menorah Medical Center for her day shift as a nurse. Some sources state that Bethany did not go to work that morning, and her whereabouts had been unknown. That is, until her body was found later that day, with a plastic bag over her head and a bottle of pills at her side. The coroner had been initially quick to label the incident as a suicide, but Bethany's family knew something was wrong, and so did investigators. Detectives also noted that inside the van, other than the note and the bottle of pills, there were no signs that pointed to Bethany overdosing on the Tylenol. Taking a whole bottle of Tylenol PM would cause acetaminophen toxicity, which is an incredibly unpleasant experience. It causes nausea, vomiting, and severe pain. This also is a question that Bethany's mother finds most confusing, as Bethany was a nurse and had access to a wide variety of pharmaceuticals. So why would Bethany take something that was so slow and painful? Her body showed more signs of being suffocated. There had been that pillow beside her, as well as the bag. But the bag wasn't tied at all, it was just loosely draped over her head. Experts noted that there's a difficulty in suffocating yourself. Even if Bethany had managed to get herself to unconsciousness, the human body has a strong reflex to prevent self-suffocation. For example, holding one's breath will eventually lead to an overwhelming urge to breathe, caused by the buildup of carbon dioxide in the blood. Most people will lose consciousness and then begin breathing involuntarily before death occurs. While using a bag or a similar device might seem like an easier method, this often results in an involuntary struggle or removal of the bag as unconsciousness approaches. The body's instinct to survive is strong and often overrides. Since the bag hadn't been tied, she would still have gotten air if she'd passed out. The plastic bag showed no signs of distress. It still appeared in good condition. It's unclear what kind of testing was done on the pillow, whether it had any other DNA other than Bethany's, and whether fibers from the pillow were on Bethany. I'd be interested to know if that had been used to suffocate Bethany, then the van was staged to look like Bethany had suffocated herself with a plastic bag. The coroner ultimately ruled Bethany's cause of death as undetermined. Detectives used Bethany's debit card and purchases to find surveillance footage from her whereabouts that day, and they did find her going into a Walmart alone, then to a gas station only hours before her van was called to the police. In the first few days of the investigation, the Jackson County Medical Examiner immediately ruled Bethany's death as a suicide and released her body to a funeral home without an autopsy. However, only days later, while Bethany's funeral was underway, officials called Bethany's parents and requested they not bury her yet. They wanted to take another look at her body and perform an autopsy. One investigator sensed something was very wrong the minute they spoke to Tyler to deliver the news of Bethany's death. Tyler didn't seem to be distraught or upset, like a newlywed or loving husband of someone would be. He instead was calm and collected, almost like he knew what was going to happen. She found the interaction with Tyler unexpected, and it would be Bethany's family that held a funeral service for her, not once believing that she'd taken her own life. Bethany was troubled by something within the community, but given her faith, they didn't believe that taking her life was an avenue that she would have taken. It was revealed that on the night of Bethany's death, Tyler got the group of the community together and held a prayer group. In his sermon, he said, quote, "Stay upbeat and press into the Lord, but this community is bigger than one person." Not exactly the words you'd expect when announcing someone's death, especially when that person was a wife. Again, Bethany's family didn't believe that she'd been capable of killing herself, and if she was going to, it wouldn't be with Tylenol in a grocery bag. They'd only seen her a few weeks ago, and they had no idea that she'd gotten to be in such a dark place in such a short amount of time. They didn't believe a word that Tyler had told them. Bethany's sister, Shannon, said in an interview, quote, "He promised to take care of my sister, which is the most sacred promise one can make. He promised my dad and my family that, and we accepted him into the family as a brother and son. Regardless of the method of death, he didn't keep that promise. That was a fraud, a complete fraud." Just a little over a week later, on November 9th, 2012, Bethany's case would be blown wide open when a community member, Micah Moore, walked into the Jackson County Sheriff's Office and confessed to taking Bethany's life. He told investigators how he drugged Bethany with Seroquel, a drug used to treat schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. In large doses, Seroquel can have a sedative effect. Once Bethany was subdued, Micah admitted to placing the white plastic bag over her head, holding it there until her body shook. The confession lined up what detectives had found at the scene. The placement of the bag had seemed odd, and it didn't appear that Bethany had overdosed at all. Some statements in Micah's confession also contained details that hadn't been released to the public, which meant that Micah, at the very least, had been to the place where Bethany had died. And when asked what motivated him to kill Bethany, who had been his friend and someone who had brought him into their group, he said, quote, "Tyler told me to." Bethany's family didn't believe that she'd written that suicide note found in the van. However, handwriting experts determined that she did write it, but the way it was written wasn't consistent with how she wrote other things. Micah's confession came seemingly out of nowhere. However, when detectives began interviewing other members of the community, they discovered that IHOP had jumped in and shut down the community. They would soon release this statement, quote, "The International House of Prayer University faculty was saddened by the tragic death of Bethany Deaton on October 30th. Bethany had attended a 6-month internship at IHOP U in 2009 and went on to become a registered nurse working at a local hospital. On November 10th, we were shocked when the Jackson County Sheriff's Office notified us that an IHOP U student by the name of Micah Moore, a man who knew Bethany since their college days in Texas, had been charged with her murder. Since Bethany's death, it has come to light that over 5 years ago, both she and Mr. Moore joined an independent, close-knit religious group in Georgetown, Texas. This religious group of fewer than 20 people had been led by Tyler Deaton. They relocated to Kansas City over the last few years and operated under a veil of secrecy. This group had always operated independently of the university, and it's important to all of us that this group's secrecy and disturbing religious practices are fully exposed. Mr. Deaton led his religious group entirely independent from IHOP U, though he and some of his members were enrolled in the university. We have been working closely with local authorities in their ongoing investigation into Bethany's death. We continue to fully assist all law enforcement agencies in their efforts to uncover the extent and specifics of this horrific crime. We are currently taking all necessary steps to minister to our students and ensure their safety and well-being. As an educational institute built around the priority of prayer, we ask everyone to please join us in praying for Bethany's family and friends and all affected by her tragic and untimely death. Due to this ongoing police investigation, we have no further comment at this time. While being interviewed with law enforcement, Micah also told investigators that Tyler and other male roommates had drugged Bethany with Seroquel and sexually assaulted her. These assaults began just days after the pair returned from their honeymoon. The reason for the murder was that Bethany's mental instability had drawn concerns that she was going to tell a therapist what they'd been doing. It also explained why Bethany had moved out of the men's house. However, apart from Micah's confession, there was no evidence to support his statements. Upon Micah Moore's confession, they did bring Tyler in for questioning, and he denied everything. There was just not enough evidence to tie him to Bethany's death, and he was released. However, Micah Moore was led away in handcuffs, and for the next 2 years, this case would be fought in and out of court. However, only weeks after being arrested, Micah recanted his confession. He argued that the confession had stemmed from an exorcism that had been performed on him by church leaders at IHOP. His lawyer told the press, quote, "There was very intense yelling, scream praying, talking in tongues, telling these kids that they were to blame for Bethany's death." Micah claimed that he'd been held for hours by church leaders and had been told by them to confess to killing Bethany. But once he realized the gravity of the situation that he was in, he didn't want to go to jail for the church. Tyler Deaton would tell the courts and the media that Michael had been suffering from psychotic episodes whilst he'd been in the community, and this is where he believed this bizarre confession had stemmed from. When faced with allegations of orchestrating his wife's murder, Tyler denied it, saying that what happened to Bethany had been a tragic accident.
Confessed killer Micah Moore entered a Jackson County courthouse for the first time this morning. On Friday, he told police he killed 27-year-old Bethany Deaton. She was a nurse and a newlywed. But according to court documents, her husband led a religious group that gathered in these apartments in Grandview, where she and others were victims of sexual assault.
There was a series of affairs going on between the decedent and others, other roommates in the home, but also, as you referred to, homosexual affairs that were going on with the spiritual leader of this group, Mr. Deaton.
Prosecutor Jean Peters Baker and detectives are staying tight-lipped about any additional persons of interest. However, Moore's confession includes an admission that Tyler Deaton, Bethany's husband, told him to kill her.
So in this particular case, I know that there's a lot of interest about other parties in this case. I have to encourage you that it is still under investigation. I cannot stress that enough, that this case is still under investigation, and that we are encouraging people who may have information to please come forward.
Moore, Bethany, and Tyler Deaton all have ties to the International House of Prayer. The group released a statement yesterday separating itself from the alleged deviant behavior. IHOP University said the community was an independent, close-knit religious group that originated in Georgetown, Texas.
Days after Bethany's passing and Micah's arrest, the community was disbanded. Members were alleged to have begun to see Tyler Deaton for who he really was, with former members describing him as being, quote, grossly sociopathic, narcissistic, and a control freak cult leader. Many of the male members of the community would later come out and confirm that they had at some point engaged in sexual relationships with Tyler Deaton, something he would deny heavily. However, with enough victims coming forward, witnesses, and evidence, he was ultimately forced to admit to having physical relationships with male community members. However, he still maintains it was all consensual. Despite many court appearances and thousands of hours spent on the case, in 2014 all charges against Micah Moore were dropped due to a lack of evidence. Most of the case had been built on his initial confession, but there wasn't enough to corroborate his story, and he was ultimately released. Without the evidence to back Micah's confession, there remains questions regarding how legitimate it was. It had been an incredibly detailed confession, and there had been aspects of the crime scene that had not been public information that Micah had gotten correct, which is what had given that confession so much credibility to investigators. Micah had claimed that there were videos of Bethany's abuse that had been recorded on an iPad, but when the homes were searched, there were no iPads found. So it raises the question of whether he was coerced and by whom. And if he was telling the truth about being held by church elders and made to confess, what did that mean that the church was trying to cover up? After the charges were dropped, Tyler gave this statement to the media, quote, "There was a whole bunch of different reactions. Like, I would have thought it would have been this like this pure relief, but I cried myself to sleep that night and the next night. But I was also angry that it was so clear and that it had gone on for so long." In that interview, he also added that he's since been to therapy to deal with the situation and to work on his quote-unquote control issues. He added in the statement, quote, "I really think that my failure to deal with being gay effectively, the ignorance, the fear, the shame, the self-hatred, the denial of it all, plays a real part in why people were even able to have a reason to think that Micah could have done something. If I had really been able to get through that somehow, then I think Bethany would be alive." Tyler Deaton has since moved away from Kansas and is trying to move on with his life. He told the media that Bethany's passing and ensuing court cases have caused him and his family to fear for their lives. Whilst Tyler's turned his back on his wife's passing, Bethany's family has not forgotten. Investigators with the Jackson County Sheriff's Office say that they are keeping the case open and actively investigating any leads that come their way. Presently, there is no solid evidence to conclusively link Tyler to Bethany's passing, but investigators are not giving up.
The man who confessed to killing Bethany Deaton last month is taking back his story.
And tonight, a former classmate tells us she knew Micah Moore and the victim's husband in Texas when their religious sect first formed. KMBC 9's Haley Harrison has this developing story from the Jackson County Courthouse in Independence. Haley?
Larry and Kelly, tonight Micah Moore's attorneys gave us this statement. It says that Bethany Deaton's death was an unfortunate suicide and says that Micah Moore had nothing to do with it. Micah Moore didn't say anything in court, but outside, his attorney revealed her client's changing story.
We are aware of no evidence that a crime has occurred.
A story about a murder made to look like a suicide discovered at Longview Lake the night before Halloween. The religious group that allegedly practiced sexual abuse and its leader who ordered Micah Moore to kill his wife. It didn't just seem stranger than fiction. Attorneys in a prepared statement say it was.
Driven to the police station by representatives of his church community, Micah told a fictional account that was bizarre, nonsensical, and most importantly, untrue.
Attorney Melanie Morgan says Moore's lie was sparked by the death of his friend, Bethany, and sudden removal of her husband, Tyler, as the leader of their religious group. The three of them moved to Kansas City several years ago after forming their close-knit community at a Texas school.
The tragic and unsettling death of Bethany Deaton revealed the dark and twisted reality beneath the facade of a seemingly pious and close-knit religious community. Bethany's journey from a bright, promising young woman to a victim of manipulation and control underscores the dangers of unchecked power within insular groups. The revelations that her husband, Tyler Deaton, and the cult-like practices of their community paint a harrowing picture of how charismatic leaders can exploit faith and trust. Bethany's case raises critical questions about the vulnerability of individuals in closed religious communities and the psychological and emotional toll of coercive control. It also highlights the importance of thorough investigations and the need for authorities to look beyond surface appearances to uncover deeper truths. Despite the initial ruling of her death as a suicide, the persistence of investigators would ultimately reveal the grim realities of Bethany's life. This story starkly reminds us about the importance of vigilance and support for those who may be trapped in similar situations. It's a call to action for friends and family and community members to recognize the signs of coercion and abuse and intervene when something feels amiss. Bethany Deaton's life, marked by her deep faith and kindness, will not be forgotten. Her tragic end serves as a powerful testament to the needs for awareness and justice, ensuring that such dark chapters are brought to light, and that victims receive the help and recognition that they deserve. Thank you for watching this deep dive into the tragic story of Bethany Deaton. If you found this video informative, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our content for more investigative content. We aim to shed light on untold stories and bring awareness to important issues. If you have any thoughts or additional information about this case, please share them in the comments below. Remember, if you or someone you know is in a situation where they feel unsafe or controlled, it's important to reach out for help. Resources and supports are available. Let's work together to ensure that stories like Bethany's lead to a greater awareness and change. Stay safe, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye.